Hello, and I hope everybody's having a wonderful Friday. I'm your host, Cynthia, and I would like to apologize for not having any readings for The Hobbit in the last 3 weeks. I have had a few things come up, but now I'm back.
"I won't have it," said William. "I caught him anyways." "You're a fat fool, William," said Bert. "As I said afore this evening. And you're a lout." "And I won't take that from you, Bill Haggins," said Bert, and put his fist through William's eye. Then there was a gorgeous row. Bilbo had just enough wits left when Bert dropped him on the ground to scramble out of the way of their feet before they were fighting like dogs and calling one another all sorts of perfectly true and applicable names in very loud voices. Soon they were locked in one another's arms and rolling nearly into the fire, kicking and thumping while Tom whacked at them both with a branch to bring them to their senses. And that, of course, only made them madder than ever. That would have been the time for Bilbo to have left, but his poor little feet had been very squashed in Bert's big paw, and he had no breath in his body, and his head was going round. So there he lay for a while, panting, just outside the circle of firelight. Right in the middle of the fight came up Balin. The dwarves had heard the noise from a distance, and after waiting for some time for Bilbo to come back, or to hoot like an owl, they started off one by one to creep towards the light as quietly as they could. No sooner did Tom see Balin come into the light than he gave an awful howl. Trolls simply detest the very sight of dwarves uncooked. Bert and Bill stopped fighting immediately, and "A sack, Tom, quick!" they said, before Balin, who was wondering where in all this commotion Bilbo was, knew what was happening. A sack was over his head, and he was down. "There is more to come yet," said Tom, "or I'm mighty mistook. Lots and none at all it is." And he, "Na burrow hobbits, but it's lots of these here dwarves. That's about the shape of it." "I reckon you're right," said Bert, "and we best get out of the light." And so they did, with the sacks in their hands that they used for carrying off mutton and other plunder. They waited in the shadows as each dwarf came up and looked at the fire and the spilled jugs and the gnawed mutton. In surprise, pop went a nasty, smelly sack over his head, and he was down. Soon Dalwyn lay by Balwyn, and Philly and Killy together, Dory and Nori and Ori all in a heap, and Odin and Glóin and Bilfur and Bulfur and Bomibur piled uncomfortably near the fire. "That'll teach 'em," said Tom, for Bilfur and Bomber had given lots of trouble and fought like mad, as dwarves will when they're concerned. Thorin came last, and he was not caught unawares. He came expecting mischief, and didn't need to see his friends' legs sticking out of the sacks to tell him that things were not all well. He stood outside the shadows some ways off, and he said, "What's all this trouble? Who has been knocking my people about?" "It's trolls," said Bilbo from behind the tree. They had forgotten all about him. "They're hiding in the bushes with sacks," he said. "Oh, they are," said Thorin, and he jumped forward to the fire. Before they could leap on him, he caught up a big branch, all on fire at one end, and Bert got that end in his eye before he could step aside. That put him out of the battle for a bit. Bilbo did his best. He caught a hold of Tom's leg as well as he could. It was thick as a young tree trunk, but he was sent spinning up into the top of some bushes when Tom kicked the sparks up in Thorin's face. Tom got the branch in his teeth for that, and lost one of the front ones. It made him howl, I can tell you, but just at that moment William came up behind and popped a sack right over Thorin's head and down to his toes, and so the fight ended. A nice pickle they were all in now, all neatly tied up in sacks, with 3 angry trolls, and 2 with burns and bashes to remember, sitting by them, arguing whether they should roast them slowly, or mince them fine and boil them, or just sit on them one by one and squash them into jelly. And Bilbo popped up in a bush with his clothes and his skin torn, not daring to move for fear they should hear him. It was just then that Gandalf came back.
but no one saw him. The trolls had just decided to roast the dwarves now and eat them later. That was Bert's idea, and after a lot of argument, they had all agreed to it.
"No good roasting 'em now, it'll take all night," said the voice.
Bert thought it was William's.
"Don't start the argument all over again, Bill," he said, "or it will take all night." "Who's arguing?" said William, who thought it was Bert who had spoken. "You are," said Bert. "You're a liar," said William, and so the argument began all over again. In the end, they decided to mince them fine and boil them. So they got a black pot, and they took out their knives. "No good boiling 'em. We ain't got no water, and it's a long way to the well and all," said a voice. Bert and William thought it was Tom. "Shut up," said they, "or we will never have it done. And ye can fetch your water yourself if ye say any more." "Shut up yourself," said Tom, who thought it was William's voice. Who's arguing but you? I would like to know." "You're a booby," said William. "Booby yourself," said Tom. And so the argument began all over again, and went on hotter than ever, until at last they decided to sit on the sacks one by one and squash them, and boil them next time. "Who shall we sit on first?" said the voice. "Better sit on the last fellow first," said Bert, whose eye had been damaged by Thorin. He thought Tom was talking. "Don't talk to yourself," said Tom. "But if you wants to sit on the last one, sit on him. Which is he?" "The one with the yellow stockings," said Bert. "Nonsense! The one with the grey stockings," said a voice like William's. "I made sure it was yellow," said Bert. "Yellow it was," said William. "Then what did you say it was grey for?" said Bert. "I never did." Tom said it. "That I never did," said Tom. "It was you." 2-1. Shut your mouth," said Bert. "Who are you talking to?" said William. "Now stop it," said Tom and Bert together. "The night's getting on and dawn comes early. Let's get on with it." "Dawn take you all and be stoned to you," said a voice. That sounded like William's, but it wasn't. For just a moment the light came over the hill, and there was a mighty twitter in the branches. William never spoke, for he stood turned to stone as he stooped, and Bert and Tom were stuck like rocks as they looked at him, and they stand to this day all alone, unless the birds perch on them, for trolls, as you probably know, must be underground before dawn, or they go back to the stuff of the mountains they are made of, and never move again. This is what had happened to Bert and Tom and William. "Excellent," said Gandalf, as he stepped from behind a tree and helped Bilbo climb down out of the thorn bush. Then Bilbo understood. It was the wizard's voice that kept the trolls bickering and quarreling until the light came and made an end to them. The next was to untie the sacks and let out the dwarves. They were nearly suffocated and very annoyed. They had not at all enjoyed lying there listening to the trolls making plans for roasting them and squashing them and mincing them. They had to hear Bilbo's account of what had happened to him twice over before they were satisfied. "Silly time to go practicing pinching and pocket picking," said Bombadil, "when what we wanted was fire and food. And that's just what you wouldn't have got of those fellows without a struggle in any case," said Gandalf. "Anyhow, you are wasting time now. Don't you realize that the trolls must have a cave or a hole dug somewhere near to hide from the sun in? We must look into it." They searched about and soon found the marks of trolls' stony boots going away through the trees. They followed the tracks up the hill until, hidden by bushes, they came on a big door of stone leading to a cave. But they could not open it, nor they all pushed while Gandalf tried various incantations. "Would this be any good?" asked Bilbo when they were getting tired and angry. Thank you for joining me in this week's chapter of The Hobbit. Tune in next week for another one. And if you'd like to help support my channel, visit cynfullarts.ca.